I
This
need
conference will now be recorded.
You want me to make you the presenter? Just a moment.
Yeah, that's.
I'm making you the presenter. Yeah, now you are the presenter.
Okay, thanks. All right. Here's the presentation. All right. Yeah. So thanks for the nice introduction. As Ramesh mentioned, I work with Society for Ecological Restoration on the certification program for restoration professionals, and I also work at the University of Minnesota teaching and doing research on a variety of things. A lot of it's restoration, but more generally management in farmland areas, actually controlling pollution and runoff. So a lot of what you call like management practices, grass buffers, treatment wetlands, and things like that, in addition to more traditional restoration work. All right, yeah, so this presentation today, I have a little bit of background material on restoration, although really it's just a couple slides. It appears like you've already had some a whole class on that, so I won't go into that too much, but I have some information on the certification program, a little bit on how it relates to the standards, international standards for restoration, and then also some case studies of individuals who have the certification. Sorry, jumped ahead there. So this is definition that SER uses for restoration, which is a process of assisting the recovery of ecosystems that have been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So it's been broadened out from what it originally was kind of defined as maybe 30, 40 years ago, where originally it was more concerned with restoring pristine systems or restoring areas to kind of a pre-damaged condition, where the focus has moved more towards recovery of ecosystem processes, kind of all areas, regardless of how degraded they've been. Let's see. There we go. Next slide. So yeah, this is laid out in this international principles and standards, which apparently you guys have read, so that's good. And it is being used more widely around the world now. The second edition just came out, and before there was no kind of unifying standards. So there's a lot of people doing restoration work, but it's kind of done in different ways, different levels. And as you recall from that the process kind of lays out the whole life cycle, going from the planning and design of projects to implementing it or actually doing it, and then monitoring, documenting, evaluating, following up, and communicating the results of it. And then of course like maintenance over time. And part of that standards is this different levels of recovery. There's this 5-star system and this restoration continuum, where they described in there these different kind of levels of the most basic, just sort of reducing societal impacts or areas that have been really damaged or impacted, to remediating or rehabilitating areas so that you're actually getting the ecosystem functions going again, things like nutrient cycling, plant community, reproduction, animals living and reproducing in there, and then all the way to kind of full recovery. All right, yeah, so when I mentioned that, because these standards are part of the certification process, and when people go through the certification, they're actually asked to describe 3 of their restoration projects and how they've used these standards in their projects. So it's good to keep that in the back of your mind. So yeah, and before I go into more details on the certification, I want to just talk about a little bit about some of the kind of current careers in restoration. And this is more, kind of a, let's say, North America focused. So the SER is a global program, but a lot of the certification has been done in the US and Canada. There's a lot of people in Canada too, and we have it's growing. There's a lot of people in England and several other continents too, Africa and Australia, and some in Asia. But there's, yeah, so in the US, I mean, it's grown, and Canada it's grown a lot in the last 30 years. You can break it up by ecosystem type or by sector. Where I am in the upper Midwest, there's been a lot of prairie restoration or grassland. We call them prairies around here. That's where a lot of the earliest work was done, and there's still a lot of work being done in that area. The area that's grown the most, though, has probably been the wetlands and streams, because there's a lot of laws protecting water quality in the US and in Canada. So there's more rules requiring restoration of those areas, and just more funding for it. A lot of people doing this work, they are consulting, doing consulting work, private sector. You guys see arrow pointing like that when I do that?
Yeah, we do. We see the cursor. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. And of course, there's a lot of people doing government work. Government agencies sponsor a lot of the grants. For example, in the Midwest, it's kind of the middle part of the U.S. where I'm from. There's this thing called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which the government funded a number of years ago, and that provides a lot of the money that actually supports lower levels of government to do restoration projects to, say, clean up, like Lake Erie or Lake Michigan, these huge freshwater lakes in the middle part of the U.S. So there's also nonprofits like Society for Ecological Restoration. There's the Nature Conservancy that I do some work with here in the Midwest. They're a global organization. They're in India. They're all over the place now. And of course, then there's people in academics doing research and teaching, like me and others. Many people in SER are academics as well. Most of the people doing the certification are professionals, but there are people doing research and managing government programs too. So yeah, I just added this slide here for this presentation, just to point out some of the work in the design professions, in ecological restoration. So there's a lot, engineers, environmental engineers, ecological engineers are involved in a lot of ways, especially doing hydrologic assessment and design. So a lot of the work they do might not be immediately about restoring ecosystems. It's often about storing water, controlling floods, removing nutrients, designing stormwater ponds to help protect areas downstream. So, installing, I said, like stormwater ponds or infiltration basins or other things to reduce the effects of damaging floods or sediment and pollutant loading to downstream water bodies. So, for example, the area where I live, there's a lot of work to, manage and treat the water before it goes into the Mississippi River, which people are trying to protect for ecological reasons, as well as for just practical and economic reasons too. But so engineers have a lot of involvement in restoration. Landscape architects are involved in a lot of ways too. And so I should say, actually, I have one of my earlier degrees was in landscape architecture from University of Wisconsin. I haven't done it as a profession, but I have, as my degree was a master's of science and not a design degree. But I've been involved in designing seed mixes and selecting native plant species for restoration projects and reforestation. So there, in North America, my experience, the landscape architects are often involved in these teams. You'll have scientists, engineers, landscape architects, some each taking a part of the project that, kind of suits them. And the landscape architects often do, the grading plans for the plant community restoration, the kind of overall site layout. And I know these professions might have similar names or different over there. The landscape architecture is the same, but over here then we have this area called urban and regional planning, where there's kind of a planning profession at a larger scale, like say city or county or state or province level, which involves open space planning, park planning, looking at landscape connectivity. All right, and so all these people are involved in restoration to varying degrees, and people in all these professions can and have applied for the certification with SER. We probably have more engineers than any of these three, actually, with landscape architects probably being second, most of the people at the certification are just are scientists with training in natural resources or conservation biology. All right, so and this is just a quick overview of the certification through SER. It's called CERP, Certified Ecological Restoration Practitioner. And there's 2 levels. One is for the senior level practitioners who have a strong knowledge base already in science and restoration. For that, you have to have at least 5 years full-time experience. Oftentimes, this will take people, say, maybe 10 years to get, because most people working here, their job isn't 100% restoration. And I'm sure Ramesh could account for this in his own work probably. And I know in the work I've done and outside of academics, it maybe half of it is restoration, or 2/3 or a quarter, depending on the job. But many people, they're doing a combination of sort of public outreach or working with laws and regulation or fundraising, all sorts of things. And the restoration is often just kind of a part of the job. All right, so if you don't have that experience, then you can apply for the Certified Ecological Restoration Practitioner in Training, or CERP it's called. And so that's for people who have the coursework but don't have 5 years experience yet, generally speaking. So that would be for what most of you would apply for if you're interested in applying for this, until you have the 5 years experience. All right, maybe I'll run through this background part, and then I'll see if there's any questions to take a break. I'll leave a few spots in here for questions, but I'll go through the next 5 slides or so and then take a break. All right, yeah, so this is just more trends on the kind of restoration field. It's growing tremendously in the last 20 years in these different areas. A lot of the work ultimately is driven by regulations and laws. So in the US, we have this thing called the Clean Water Act, which required government agencies and units to make sure that their water bodies were meeting the standards for water quality. And then that required restoration activities and watershed management activities to make sure that they were meeting those water quality standards. And then the Endangered Species Act requires recovery of salmon and a lot of other fish species, not just fish, all wildlife, aquatic life. That has driven a lot of the restoration activity, especially in the western United States, places like Oregon and Washington and California, where there's all these endangered salmon species. There's also been a lot of growth in this, just what I would call native landscaping. So around where I live in this area called the Twin Cities, so Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. The native landscaping business is really big, and while not all of it would be described as ecological restoration per se, it does involve getting rid of invasive species, planting native plants, often ones that are more kind of have aesthetic value or look nice for the landowners. But it's kind of like the beginning stages of restoration work, and some of it becomes really small scale prairie restoration and things. So that's where a lot of the work is, and a lot of the companies here, they'll do this native landscaping, and then where they can, they'll do kind of try to promote more restoration work or kind of larger scale prairie or forest or even small wetland restoration. So that's been a huge growth area, say in North America and Europe too, in Australia to some degree, I think. Then, most recently, as you guys know about this UN Decade for Ecological Restoration, we're hoping will, motivate a lot of work in restoration. I mean, this first year of 2020 obviously was not the best start to the decade with COVID and everything, but we have a lot of hopes that that'll motivate a lot of work over the next 10 years, and SER is involved with that. All right, these are just some examples of jobs from North America, but some of the job titles of people who do restoration work. So I used to have a job called Water Resources Specialist before my current work, and I did about half wetland restoration or review of permits and things that involved, recovering some areas that were degraded. Other kind of job titles Again, if you looked at these, you wouldn't necessarily think an assistant professor or a soil conservationist was necessarily doing restoration work, but often they are doing a fair chunk of their job is restoration. People who work for these native landscape companies and are out installing native plants, they're often the ones doing the most restoration work, and sometimes basically all their job is restoration. A lot of the work in the restoration field is with this site assessment or analysis. So of course, before you can go out and plant some things or restore the hydrology, you have to analyze the site and the surrounding areas, determine on what the existing conditions are, what the potentials are, what your goals might be, limitations and things. And so a lot of the work is more sort of say science, sort of basic science, more routine and not creative part of designing what's going to be on the site. That kind of comes afterwards. Of course, that is an important part of it too. Yeah, and then I just threw this example of the design part of it in here. This is Frederick Law Olmsted, one of the founding people of landscape architecture from back over a century ago. This is Central Park in New York. Again, so the landscape architects definitely play a key role in designing the planting plans and assessing the planting stock and ways of installing those plants on the sites. Let's see. This is just a flow chart of all the kind of feedbacks and connections of these different career groups. Based on my kind of experience in the U.S., so a lot of the work on the ground level comes from this native landscaping work, but also in the schools and more in elementary schools, kids getting trained about ecology and the value of restoring habitats. I mean, that's what builds up the sort of future interest in restoration. So that's a really important part of it. But also a lot of the work has been done with volunteer groups, so people working with nonprofits. I mean, places like Junglescapes or Nature Conservancy, to do just put some plants in the ground, remove invasive species. Around here, I've been involved in work where we remove this shrub called buckthorn, which kind of grows over and takes over the native forests. So there's a lot of the ground level work is just in volunteer work with nonprofits. And a lot of people get their first experiences in restoration, even if you have a professional degree in another area like architecture, this is a good way to get more ecological experience, which you can then use later in your professional work. And then this kind of feeds into these larger levels, larger NGOs, non-governmental organizations like World Wildlife Fund and TNC, local and state governments consulting, and then on the top you have like federal governments, state, national government programs, international programs like United Nations, and climate agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, which is motivating a lot of work to store carbon, sequester carbon. But a lot of that type of work is increasingly revolving around using natural climate solutions, they're calling them. So planting forests, protecting forests, but also things like trying to store carbon in the ground in agriculture. So doing agriculture in a way that increases organic matter in the soil. That wasn't recognized as a thing that was part of restoration, say a decade ago, but people are making those connections more and more, and that would be kind of more on the lower scale of that restoration continuum, where you're just trying to reduce societal impacts. All right, you could just take a break here, see if there's any questions, and then I could go into these career examples and have the show the application materials. But does anybody have any questions at this point or comments? We can wait till the end too if nobody has any.
Chris, I have a question. you said at some point that there are a fair number of landscape architects who are applying for the certification.
Yeah.
So the work that they do probably with private clients or small urban spaces. So that also counts for the 5-year experience, does it?
Yeah. So, and that is, it's not an exact science there. I would say most landscape architects who apply, yeah, not 100% of their time would count as the restoration, maybe half, because some of it, they're just like designing garden, or, if it has, or like if it has nothing to do with ecological restoration, they can't really count it. So some of it's for like commercial developments, like mall, like just like the landscaping around a mall or something like that. So yeah, that's a good question. It's a debate that will come up in these applications, and sometimes the applicants will, try sort of argue that their experience was restoration, and the committee will say, well, that really wasn't. So yeah, I would say generally the 100% of their time isn't always that way. Mostly that wouldn't be that way, but much of it would be counted as restoration work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Swati here. I
Hey.
just have one question.
Uh-huh.
I think I missed the first slides, but when you say there are different career, there are people or professionals from different careers or different paths joining this CERP program. So how do you really, like for example, in our course here that we are doing in Pune with SER and Junglescapes, the participants are from varied backgrounds, and some of them already have experience of restoration, and I'm a landscape architect, and I'm like I have not worked on field yet on the restoration project. So when these kind of extreme ends join for this program, how difficult it is for a landscape architect to cope up?
To qualify? Well, yeah. So so first you have to have the course background, and I'll show that in a couple slides. Well, here actually I could actually jump ahead and just maybe show that to you right now. Oops, not maybe. Well, I'll get to it in a minute, but yeah. But so first you have to have the coursework, and there's coursework in physical sciences, biology, quantitative sciences like math or statistics, and then you have to have classes in natural resources management or conservation, and then restoration. So hopefully you would have had those courses in your undergraduate program. They call it undergraduate program there, the college, the first 4 years of college.
Yes, undergraduate program. Yes, and then postgraduate program.
Yeah. So to get the CERP, you need to have these courses, and there is some like allowance for not having some of the courses by this thing called this prior to learning and acquisition of knowledge through other means. It's called It's called. So you can if you didn't have a restoration class but you had done it in your job, you can get that credit for it by having the work experience. But then yeah, the 5 years in the restoration field doing the actual work, it is harder to get that, and like I said, a lot of people who end up applying have more than 5 years because most of restoration. And I don't know if that, so you're asking if your job doesn't have anything on restoration or very little, like how would you be able to get it? Basically, is that?
We have done the foundation course now, but not really worked with a restoration project, say for many years or something like that. So our knowledge maybe is only theoretical.
Yeah. So well, that's what the CERP is for. So you apply to get the CERP in training. The CERP it's called, and so that's the certification if you have the coursework but not the practical experience. So you can get in it that way, and get that level of certification, and then as you work in your career over time, then you'd get the CERP. Yeah, so like a lot of the people who are applying have been working for like 10-20 years actually, and so a lot of people who are recent graduates are getting this the CERP in training, CERP it. And we have been thinking of changing the name of that actually, because it should be it should make it sound as if it's somebody who is not just in training but has experience already. But that that was the name that was picked. So the 2 levels of certification. So yeah, does that answer your question though?
Yes. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Hi.
Well, here. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Chris.
Hi.
So I had this question, like I'm trained in ecology and I've been working in this field since 10 years. I've done my master's in biodiversity and conservation. And I have worked on a spectrum of projects ranging from recreation ecology and community-based tourism to a grassroots level social project on conservation. And the other spectrum is an urban biodiversity project with a corporate where I help them build a urban biodiversity park. Now, my question is whether I should apply for CERP or CERPIT. Where do I qualify is something that I'm not very sure about.
Yeah, so that you could be in either one. If you have that much experience and you have the degrees too, you're doing the master's degree now in landscape architecture?
I've done it 10 years ago, my master's in biodiversity and conservation.
Oh, right, you have that too. Oh, okay. Yeah, so you could apply for either. I would look through the standards, or I mean, sorry, not standards, the requirements for the application. I'll show it here in a little bit. But yeah, I would, maybe I would just apply for the CERP, because if you don't meet the qualifications, it can always just recommend that you have the CERP it, and then maybe you'd need to do some other short courses or get a little more experience. But it'd be possible that you would be able to just get the CERP now with that much experience. It is kind of a challenge for the review committee. I said it's kind of North American bias. I mean, we have people from the U.S. and Canada. There's some other countries in there. I mean, Ramesh is on the board of SER, but the experiences of people in different countries, it's different, and it's harder for people to on the committee to interpret how to convert those years and different credits and different systems to line up with the requirements. But we're working on that and trying to expand the kind of understanding of different experiences and credit systems. So yeah, but I would just go ahead. I would just apply for the CERP and then to see if you get it. And it seems like it'd be pretty likely. If not, then you could do the CERP it, and then you might be able to reapply in like a year or two or something.
Right. Because my project in the recreation ecology, it was more on understanding impacts of human trampling on a rock outcrop. So it wasn't actually doing a restoration project, but it was more of understanding the ecological impacts on the plant communities by mass
yeah.
So the line is very thin over there.
The what was very thin?
I said the line, because the study is being used by managers to reduce the impacts, but I didn't as such do any plantation over there or introduce seeds or but I did a research project over there.
Yeah, no, that you can count that. I mean, you don't have to actually do the on the ground work, because a lot of time that's done by contractors or volunteers. A lot of it is the design and planning of it for the professional certification. So yeah, they prefer that you have some more practical experience and not just research. So yeah, so that sounds like this could be kind of a what's the word, one that would take some thought by the committee to look at it and interpret. But it sounds like you have enough that it'd be worth applying for it and just seeing what people say. We have people on the committee that are review them. One of them, actually, this guy on the right is actually one of the committee members right there. He is a PhD, and so we have a number of groups, people on this committee that review, and some are scientists who are doing research and stuff, so they understand the value of that. Yeah, so
okay,
yeah, Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, what's your name again?
Prerna. My name is Prerna Agarwal.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Just in case that you apply, then I'll try to remember that.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I have a couple examples, and I was going to show the actual application. But so these are two people who have got certification. One is more of an engineering science background, and the other is a scientist and has a PhD. Nick works for state of Massachusetts, so in a government job working on river restoration and dam removal. And Paul has a PhD more in kind of ecological science and does work with a consulting company on restoration and other projects. Again, both these guys probably only a fraction of their job is on restoration. Nick is mostly on restoration. Paul is maybe half of what he does is restoration. I'm just having trouble getting it to advance. There you go. Yeah, there's Nick. So he works with Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. They've been doing a lot of work on removing dams to restore river ecology. They have a lot of old aging dams in that part of the U.S. It's in the Northeast, which is kind of the longer settled and more developed, but a lot of old aging dams. So they're taking those out to restore river ecology and function. And his work involves science, engineering, policy, working with laws, environmental laws. He has background in a lot of different areas, science and policy. And he applied to be involved with the CERP program so he could try to focus his career more on restoration, have a sense of community in terms of being connected to other people who are doing restoration work and accessing the network. So there's a lot of other people doing restoration work that you can meet in other parts of the world. So that's valuable to a lot of people. He just did a webinar. You can see a lot of these webinars on SER. And you can see the most current ones. Some of the older ones you have to be a member to access, be a member of SER. And I encourage you all to join if you are not a member. There is a fee, but there's also an open doors rate where they can reduce the rate if you can't afford the main fee. I can give you more information on that in the end for people who are interested in that. If you're an SER member, you also get a lower rate for the CERP application. And our second kind of case study person here is this Paul Davis. He has a whole bunch of different certifications. He has the CERP, but he also has the Professional Wetland Scientist, which is PWS, which is something that comes up in the US because you have to identify the boundaries of wetlands because they're legally protected by the Clean Water Act. So he has these different certifications. I'm not actually sure what the CPSS is, but a lot of people do this, especially if they're not engineers or landscape architects. They get a variety of these certifications. He's worked for this company called GZA, Geoenvironmental, for a long time. This is one of these really kind of international engineering science consulting companies that does work all over the place. He tries to do a lot of the work on restoration. His projects involve things across this continuum, from just recovering really degraded areas to improve soil function and just get vegetative cover, and erosion control, all up to restoring, rare or sensitive areas and improving their function, or the 5-star recovery on the right. As a consultant, he works with the public. He, does ecological restoration plans where it's the primary goal, but also where it's just a secondary goal. This happens a lot. So a common example of this is in the US. If you have like a highway or a road that is going to impact a wetland, say they're making the road larger for safety reasons, but you're filling, say, like a couple hectares of wetland, then you'll have to restore or recreate a wetland in another area. So it's kind of the secondary goal of the project. The project wasn't to restore the environment only, it's as kind of to mitigate impacts of a development or a road project or an energy project. that happens all the time. That's probably the most common work people are doing. The projects where they're just going out and restoring an ecosystem independently of any regulations, it's not as common because there's not the funding behind it to do it. All right, and then these are some of the examples of projects he's done. This is a dam removal project that he worked on, where they did the staged dam removal, where they kind of knock parts of the dam off over time and then let the drained pond, which has all this loose sediment, sort of stabilize so that sediment doesn't blast out of there and kind of drain downstream and impact the stream, damage the downstream environment in the river. All right, so this is a big type of project in the northeastern United States, other parts of the U.S. too. Other types of restoration projects. This is a shoreline project. This it's called the Long Wharf Flood Protection Project. So it was a shoreline on the coastal east coast of the U.S. where it was eroding. They needed to stabilize the shoreline to not only protect that habitat, but to protect the roads and infrastructure behind it. So it was a combination of an erosion control project and an ecological restoration project, because they're using this living shoreline design where they're using native plants and native materials to stabilize the sand dunes in this kind of a beach area. So kind of a combination of engineering, restoration, landscape architecture. There's some projects at airports that he did. The airports have these big open areas next to them so as not to impede the sight line of the planes, or so they're kept open as these grass habitats, which sometimes serve as habitat for rare species, actually, because they have to keep open these huge kind of prairie or grassland environments. So there's been a lot of people have worked on these projects to sort of plan the airport runways, minimize impact from like road salt runoff, try to improve the vegetation and the habitat in those areas for the rare butterflies, moss, birds, things like that. These are some of the benefits that he saw of doing CERP as a consultant, to kind of add your credentials, to demonstrate that you have this knowledge and experience in public, to agree to the ethics, kind of demonstrating that you care about doing good restoration work and aren't just doing work to maximize the profit, but are trying to work on restoring the environment. Yeah, and it helps to elevate your individual credentials, but also the companies, or the the firms that are working on these things, showing that they're have high professional standards and are trying to work with nonprofits to do good work. All right, yeah, and then there's an increasing possibility of projects requiring people to have the CERP to do projects. It's not happening too much yet. It does happen, of course, like with engineers and landscape architects, where you're required to have the certification to do projects. With the CERP, it hasn't quite grown to that point yet, but it probably will at some point in the future. It has with some of the other certifications, like the professional wetland scientist. You actually see that required for certain types of projects in the US and Canada. All right, so this is just some advice for people with applications, saying that take time to do it, basically, because it takes a little bit of time to look at your projects and see how they line up with the standards, and then describing your courses and how they fit in with the course requirements. All right, and this will probably be a good time to, I actually just jump ahead to the application here. This is just a example of a person with a CERP. Keith actually works with us at SER. He's from Canada, and he got the training, the certification, to help sort of advance his career. And he's got a lot of different restoration experiences now. I think it's been good for him. All right, so I'm gonna go through some of this just because of the time. There's these jobs websites, which I can show you more at the end, but yeah, I want to get to just the application itself here, and then leave some time for question at the end. So we're getting close to the end of the hour here, but yeah, so the certification, you can apply at any time now, actually. We have these focused review periods. The next one's coming up February 15th to April 15th. and you can do it all online. So you can start it, even if you think it might take you a while, you can definitely start it. And it has a few parts. There's an online e-learning course, which takes an hour or two based on the restoration standards and some other background history with SER in the restoration field. It's pretty easy. It's not a difficult thing, but it's required to get the certification. Then you have to pay a fee for CERP. If you're a SER member, it's $100. If you're not, it's $200 for CERP. Controls on the screen are blocking my slideshow. There we go. Yeah, so $100 or $200 for CERP. We do have a thing called open doors where we can modify the fees if people have trouble paying that much. We have done that for others in India and many countries. Let me see. This is the application kind of overview or cycle. So you have to have knowledge base, the courses, professional level experience, project experience, sign the ethics agreements, and then you need the references. To do the CERP, you don't need the project experience. You just need the knowledge base, the classes, and the reference letters, and signing the ethics agreement. So these are the core areas of knowledge that you need: the restoration on top, quantitative science, math, statistics, monitoring or GIS analysis, natural resources management, conservation or conservation biology kind of coursework or knowledge. You can also get these things through webinars and workshop. It's not just academic semester classes. And the basic physical sciences, chemistry, physics, geology, etc. And then biological science, ecology, botany, zoology, things like that. This is the table of the courses that you need. So you need 15 in biology, 15 physical sciences, with at least 6 in soils, hydrology, or climate, resource management and conservation 12, quantitative science 9, ecological restoration 6. And so I say here, yeah, so this is based on in the US credit system, where a typical 1 semester class is 3 credits. So ecological restoration would basically be two courses in restoration. Quantitative science, basically 3 classes. If you have a lab, they might be worth more than that. All right, and if you're applying for the CERP, if you don't have some of these classes, you can use this category called prior learning assessment and recognition of knowledge gained from other means. This is because we know not every school has restoration classes. As Ramesh said, none or few in India have restoration classes. And it's true, in the US, most of them don't. I mean, many of them do now, but most of them don't. So you're allowed to use this basically knowledge and experience gained about restoration in your job or through other training opportunities like workshops, webinars, things like that. And we have a ton of these webinars on SER now, I should point out, every week now. It used to be like every, month or every couple of weeks. Now there's a lot of them happening like every week, and you can access them from anywhere. But again, it's a good reason to join SER, so you are better aware of those things and can access like all the resources on the website. All right, so this is just about the project experience when you apply for the CERP. You need to, describe 3 projects and your role in those projects, what the objectives were, the applicant's role, how it relates to the standards and principles. Experience can include design, implementing, or actually doing the project, monitoring, things like research and or oversight. So if you're like a program manager of a program that's funding restoration, like I mentioned, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative in the US, that's a government program where they're not actually doing the projects. But if you were managing that program or involved in managing it, you would get credit for that as restoration work. All right, that advancing is really kind of slow on here. All right, and then this is more on the CERP, and 5 years full-time experience needed. Need the 3 letters of reference. All right, and that's all I have. So yeah, so you can apply now or wait until this window opens. We are redoing the e-learning course right now and trying to get it up onto a new platform, which has caused a little bit of made it a little more difficult to get the thing done. But when we get it up on the new website, it'll be easy to access that. You can view it on the SER website now too. It's just you have to go through a series of questions on it to complete it officially. All right, yeah, so that's all. Hopefully that answered your questions and got you interested in it.
Thank you, Chris. I have an observation and a question.
Okay.
The observation is that there are plenty of good online courses available nowadays.
Yeah.
On platforms like Coursera, there are good courses on sampling technique and methodology, plant science, etc., which are with certificate courses. They offer a certificate at the end of the course, and there are also good courses in India on conservation, like one of the leading conservation non-profits called the Bombay Natural History Society. They run a program called the Leadership Course in Biodiversity Conservation. That's a 1-year program on biodiversity conservation. It's an outstanding course. So there are many such ways in which people can get these knowledge credits, even if they've not gone through a proper academic course. That was the observation. The question is, you also mentioned about webinars, which is also very useful because there may be more than 100 webinars on the SER website. And if somebody has attended a webinar, how do they, so they, once they become members and you will be able to track that they've actually attended the webinar?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to do it. The first use of that was that people who already have the CERP and the CERPIT, they can sign up for it and they get a continuing education credit. The original purpose of the webinars wasn't to provide the education requirements for the application itself, but it was for continuing education. Yeah. But it's changed. The online education has grown so rapidly. I mean, it just keeps expanding at like a growing rate. Yeah, and so now more and more people can use those. And yeah, they have certificates of completion for the pre-approved ones, and many of them you can access. I'm trying to think. I think you can get some of them without being a member. I think you can view some of them, but a lot of the material you need to be a member.
Most of the participants of this program are already members of SER.
Oh, they are. Okay. I didn't realize that. Okay. Yeah. So so then you can look at there's the live ones, and then there's the past ones that are recorded, and you can access those. But if you were applying for the CERP or the CERPIT, I mean, I would keep a list of them, almost as if it were a transcript of your college courses. Of course, they're not obviously as many hours as a semester course, and so you need to do a lot of webinars and things. But if you're just missing like the restoration, you could do a number of them, and then the committee would kind of evaluate the hours and whether it was equivalent to a semester course, or how much you needed, how many webinars you needed to do to get a semester course. Yeah, it's kind of a new thing. Like I was saying, originally it was meant as continuing education for people who already got the certification to maintain their certification. But it's just growing so much. Like Ramesh said, there's so many opportunities to do these things. There's even, workshops and short courses that go over, many days that would be worth, more credits. There was a bunch of people in CERP who just went to this. There was this stream restoration one about building beaver dam and beaver dam analogs. It's a big thing in the U.S. now. But anyway, yeah. So I guess if you got any other questions, you can, my email address is on here, the certification@ser.org. And yeah, you know, feel free to contact me there, or apply for the CERP or CERP if you have the more experience. Does anybody have any other thoughts or comments about anything with landscape architecture or restoration or anything? Okay.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you. But unmute yourself. I think you have to unmute yourself. Can you type the question, please? Can you type the question in the chat box? Anybody else have a question? Please type it on the chat box so that it's easier to. Sir, you want to ask a question, SAR Synergies?
Yeah, first of all, I apologize for putting my firm's name there. I don't know how it appeared. My name is Shishir Raul. I'm a landscape architect, and I have some experience in ecological restoration. And I had some questions which your presentation has answered already, but I wanted to know whether this certification is ecosystem specific or generic, or the examples will be taken from various types of ecosystems like grassland, wetland, coastal, marshland, I mean things like that. So
it's generic right now. There's no, it can be any environment.
Okay.
Yeah.
And having taught in the landscape architecture program in the US and here in India, now I'm in India. I was in the US for many years, and I returned back to India. And so the two programs that you described, CERP and SERP. So the SERP seems to be more involved, and yeah. I'm about to start a project on a small scale on stream bank restoration. Bank restoration.
Yeah.
And so it is actually voluntary work. It is not yet a professional project, but we wanted to demonstrate something. So we have taken a section of a stream. So would that be something that I should consider as a SERP kind of opportunity?
Oh, would you consider as experience that you could use for the certification? That's what you're asking?
No. For this other second program that you talked about.
The CERPIT?
CERPIT, CERPIT?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, you could.
Would that be something?
Chris, I think the question is whether these type of experiences can be added up for this 5 years in the CERPIT.
Yeah.
That is the question.
No, that is not the question.
Okay.
The question is whether while doing this project, would that be while doing this project, can I register for this CERPIT program, PIT program, or should I do it after I finish the project?
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, that's just depends on if you think you had enough experience to qualify or not already. It sounds like you have a lot of landscape architect experience, maybe not quite as much in restoration itself.
Actually, on both the campuses that I spent my time in the US, first in Ann Arbor and next in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Good.
On both the campuses, I mean, I was very fortunate to have my teachers or colleagues who were involved in restoration projects. And as a studio instructor in landscape architecture, I had the experience of working with a multidisciplinary team, though I didn't have any certificate. So one project was stream restoration, and the other project was related to prairie restoration.
Yeah, no, that's good. So you could use those experiences, I guess. I mean, you just have to look at it and see whether you think you had the 5 years or not. And then if you're close, you could apply for the CERP. If you think you only had a, 2 or 3 years total, you might apply for the CERP first, and then you can upgrade after you have the experience.
Okay.
Or if you think you don't have quite the whole 5 years, you can just wait until you finish that project and apply.
Right.
Okay. You could email, me too, if you had like the list of, I don't know, projects or something, years, you could send it to me and I could try to advise you. It doesn't, either way, it's good just to get into it. It doesn't, you'd rather have the CERP, obviously, but if you don't quite have that experience, it's good to be in both because they're kind of treated the same, either way. And then eventually, if you got the CERP eventually you would get into the CERP anyways.
Yeah.
If you keep doing the work. And it sounds like you already have a lot of experience. So yeah, if you had a quick question about the actual number of years, you could just email me maybe, and I could look at it and see and give you a kind of a recommendation which one to apply for.
Right.
You can use
the same email address as certification@ser.org.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, and the volunteer work does count especially if you're designing it or kind of directing it in a way that would be similar to, professional work. What might not count is if you were, say, like removing invasive species, but you were only sort of doing the manual labor and you weren't sort of using any of your training to kind of direct what was going on. That would be
I'll be the coordinator, designer, and from scratch to like 2-3 years of follow-up, whatever it takes.
That would definitely would count. Yeah, that's good. Was there somebody else trying to ask a question back there? All right.
Yeah, Chris, am I audible now?
Yeah, I can hear.
I just had a quick question. So I tried converting my university hours to credits, but I'm facing some issue with that. So I was just wondering if there's a thumb rule used, or I need to contact my university to get the transcript for that.
Oh, so I don't know that there's any universities that will automatically try to convert your credits to like a US equivalent. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because during my time, we didn't have the credit system. We had like the hours, and like that's what my mark sheet has. So I'm just trying to figure out how to convert it to credits to apply for SER, the CERP.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and we need to at SER try to understand those other credit systems better, or our systems. Yeah, but right now there is no easy way to just convert it. So like I said, a 1 semester credit in the US is about 15 hours generally. So like a 3-credit class would be like 45 hours. So yeah, so you can kind of take it from there. Are you thinking of applying for it, or are you just checking? Because if you apply for it, we could look at it, or you could send me a couple examples and I could try to estimate what I thought the hours were.
Right. Because I was planning to apply, and earlier I got stuck with the credit system, and then I dropped the idea. But now that I'm having a conversation with you, I thought I'll check with you and figure it out.
Yeah. So we'll do. I said we don't have like sort of an equation written out right now for India, but we've had. We've had I guess 2. So we've only had 2. So yeah. So hopefully that'll improve in the future. We can figure out. Now that we've had a little experience with it, it is quite different though. So it's a little bit of a challenge to figure out. I know in the last person that applied, but so now that we've had a little bit of experience, hopefully it'll be a little more straightforward. So I'll just go ahead, and apply. But if you wanted to send it first, I could try to figure it out a little better.
I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
So if there are no more questions, Chris, I think we'll end the session. And anybody has more questions, please feel free to contact Chris on certification@ser.org. So thank you very much, Chris. That was very exhaustive, highly informative. I think you covered almost, your presentation answered most of the questions that people had in their minds. And it is good to see that the certification program is quite flexible. It's not very rigid. So there are different types of experiences that get counted. And what I would recommend is people who do not have experience to go in for the CERPIT, because the CERPIT gives you the motivation to go and get the experience. So the CERPIT can actually be a catalyst for you to go and do some work on the ground. And between Swati, myself and Kaustubh, we are trying to put together a list of restoration projects in India who are willing to take volunteers. So we'll try and create a volunteering database, and you can start volunteering with some of those projects and gain the experience. So we are already working on that. I look forward to more CERPs and CERPITs from India, at least in the next couple of years. As Chris said, there are only 2 now. So we should at least have, for a country of our size, we should at least have about 20 to 50 certified professionals. So thank you very much, Chris, for that, for your time.
Thanks, Ramesh, for organizing this for us. Thanks a lot.
No, it was nice to welcome.
So, Ramesh,
Nice talking to you.
Chris, thank you so much, Ramesh and Chris, both of you. I'm Swati here. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati.
You're welcome.
Swati is from BNCA, and she is the person who started this program at the university. She is the head of the Department of Landscape.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, no, it's great to talk to you and meet some of you. So yeah, I look forward to hearing from some of you in emails and applications.
Thank you, Chris.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right. Have a
Chris,
good day. Good night.
Chris, are you at University of Wisconsin?
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Okay.
Yeah, it's we're on Central Time. It's like 9:40 in the morning.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
We extended the time. Thank you for staying beyond the time. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.